The key wouldn't turn. I jiggled it, pulled it back an inch, pushed it in again, and it still wouldn't turn. 11 days I'd been gone. 11 days sitting by my sister's hospital bed in Mobile, holding her hand through a hip replacement, and now my own front door was treating me like a stranger. My name is Otavia Fairweather, 64 years old, 31 years in that house. I stepped back onto the porch, and that's when I saw the trucks. 2 of them, backed halfway up my driveway, doors open, strangers carrying boxes through my front door like they'd been given a map. I stood there in the rain with my suitcase handle cutting into my palm, and my mind went somewhere quiet and cold. The kind of quiet that comes right before you understand something you don't want to understand. I called my son, straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail again. 4 hours I stood under that carport, watching water run off the gutter Cortez, and I put up ourselves the summer before he passed, calling a phone that wouldn't ring through. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city below. I read every single one of them. And tonight, more than most nights, I need to know I'm not standing out here by myself. It was near dark when the front door finally opened, and Tressie stood there in a robe that cost more than my first car, her hair still wrapped like she hadn't planned on seeing anybody. She didn't step out into the rain to get me. She stood in the dry, under the porch light, and looked at me the way you look at somebody selling something on your doorstep. "Otavia," she said, real soft, real calm. "Marlon and I have talked, and we've decided you don't live here anymore. My family's moving in tonight." I didn't say a word at first. I let the rain run down the back of my collar, and I looked at her face, the practiced stillness of it, like she'd rehearsed this in a mirror. "This is my house," I said. "It's complicated now," she said. "Legally, I mean, given how things are set up." She said it light, almost bored, like she was talking about a change in the weather. But something about the way she said how things are set up caught in my chest like a fishhook. That wasn't a phrase somebody reaches for on the spot. That was a phrase somebody's already sat with, already practiced, already knows the shape of. Behind her, through the open door, I saw her mother directing a man carrying my reading chair to the curb like it was trash. Her father stood off to the side, not looking at me at all, which told me more than if he had. I could have screamed. Lord knows I wanted to. I could have pushed past her, could have called the police right there on the porch and made a scene loud enough for the whole street to hear. But 64 years teaches you something 26 years hasn't learned yet. A scene is exactly what she wanted. A crying old woman in the rain, easy to dismiss, easy to explain away later as confused, unstable, not thinking straight. So I didn't give her that. "Understood," I said, and I turned around and walked back to my car in the rain, my suitcase still in my hand, my own front door closing behind me for what felt like the last time. I checked into a motel off the interstate that night, water still dripping from my collar onto sheets that weren't mine. And lying there in the dark, I kept hearing her voice. Not the ultimatum. Not, "You don't live here anymore." I kept hearing 4 words, "how things are set up." That wasn't a guess. That was knowledge. And I needed to know exactly what she knew, and how long she'd known it. 3 weeks before that key ever failed me, Tressie showed up at my door on a Tuesday afternoon with a manila folder tucked under her arm and a smile that stayed too long on her face. "I found something that could really protect you," she said, letting herself in past me the way she always did, like the house had already stopped being fully mine in her mind. A friend of mine at the bank walked me through it. Trust protection, in case anything ever happens with your health, with money for a home someday. Just a safeguard. Marlon was already sitting at my kitchen table when she said it, which told me they'd talked about this before they ever brought it to me. I opened the folder and started reading. and something in my chest tightened before my mind caught up to why. The language was thick, the kind of paragraph that repeats itself in 3 different ways, so you stop, reading closely by the second page. I asked her what transfer of beneficial interest meant, and she waved her hand like I'd asked something silly. It's just formality language, Atavia. Standard stuff. I looked at Marlon, waited for him to look back at me the way he used to when he was a boy, and knew I needed him to back me up. Ma, if Tressie says it's fine, he said, not even glancing up from his phone. You always think everything's got a catch. It wasn't cruel, the way he said it. That's what made it hurt worse. He wasn't defending her over me. He just didn't think there was anything worth defending against. And a mother knows the difference between a son choosing someone else and a son not seeing the danger at all. Tressie had already called the notary before I'd agreed to anything. A young man named Winslow Duckworth showed up not 20 minutes later, like he'd been sitting in his car down the block waiting for the signal. He set his stamp and his little book down on my table, and when he reached for his pen, I noticed his hand wasn't steady. Not shaking bad, just enough that the cap rattled once against the pen before he got it open. "You all right?" I asked him, and I meant it kindly. "Long day," he said, not meeting my eyes, and started flipping to the signature pages faster than a man walking through his own paperwork should. I sat there with the pen in my hand a long moment. Something in my gut said wait, said read it again, said ask Tressie to leave it with you overnight so you can take it to somebody who doesn't work for her. But Marlon was sitting right there, my son, at my own kitchen table, looking bored and a little impatient, like I was the one making things difficult. I didn't want to be the mother who couldn't trust her own child in front of his wife. I didn't want 39 years of raising a good man to end with me treating him like a stranger's accomplice. So I signed where she pointed. Winslow stamped it fast, packed his bag faster, and was gone before I even offered him something to drink, which wasn't like any notary I'd dealt with before. Lying in that motel bed 3 weeks later, staring at a ceiling that wasn't mine, I finally let myself think the thought all the way through instead of pushing it away. That folder was never about protecting me from anything. It was the paperwork that let her lock me out of my own front door. I didn't change clothes that morning, didn't shower, didn't fix my hair, didn't do any of the things a woman my age is supposed to do before she walks out into the world. I got up off that motel bed still smelling like yesterday's rain and drove straight downtown, because some things can't wait for a woman to look presentable first. The Fulton County Recorder's office opens at 8. I was standing at the counter at 8:01. Odell Verleen has worked behind that counter longer than I've known her, going on 15 years now, ever since she helped me file Cortez's death certificate and didn't rush me through it the way some clerks do. She looked up, saw my face, and whatever she was about to say about the line or the forms just stopped in her throat. "Otavia, Lord, what happened to you?" "I need to file a fraud affidavit," I said, "against a deed transfer. My deed." I didn't cry, telling her. I'd used up whatever tears I had standing under that carport 2 nights before, and what was left in me now was something flatter and harder, something that wanted facts more than it wanted comfort. Odell must have seen that, because she didn't try to hug me or soften her voice the way people do with old women they think are fragile. She just pulled up her keyboard and got to work. "Walk me through it," she said. I told her about the folder, the trust language, the notary who couldn't hold his pen steady. I told her about the locks. She typed as I talked, and every few seconds her mouth would tighten a little more, until she stopped typing altogether and just stared at the screen. Otavia, she said slowly, I need you to sit down for this. I didn't sit. Just say it, Odell. She turned the monitor so I could see it myself, because I think some part of her didn't want to be the one to say the words out loud. There, on the county's own record, sat a refinance against my house, recorded 8 days before I ever got off that plane from Mobile. 8 days before Tressie ever stood on my porch and told me I didn't live there anymore. She'd already had the money before she bothered to lock the door. Who filed it? I asked, though some cold, steady part of me already knew the shape of the answer before she gave it. Odell scrolled down, and her finger stopped on a line near the bottom of the screen. There's a co-signer, she said quietly. Otavia, it's Marlon's name on this loan. I stood there at that counter and felt something shift inside me. Some door closing on the woman who'd stood crying in the rain 2 nights ago and opening onto somebody else entirely. Somebody who wasn't going to feel her way through this anymore. Somebody who was going to think her way through it instead. My son's signature. On a loan against a house that was never legally hers to borrow against. Which meant either my son had known exactly what he was signing, or somebody had used his name the same way they'd used mine. Quietly, quickly, while nobody was looking closely enough to stop it. I asked Odell to print me everything, every page, every date, every signature line. I want copies of all of it, I said. Today. She didn't ask me why. She just started printing. My phone rang before I even had those copies sorted on the motel bed, and I knew from the second word out of my son's mouth that something had cracked open in him. Ma. Just that. Flat. Thin. Not like Marlon at all. I'm here, I said. I heard paper rustling on his end, the kind of sound a man makes when his hands aren't quite steady. I got a letter today, from the lender, about the home equity loan Tressie set up, the one she told me was for renovations. They're saying it's connected to a fraudulent title transfer. $86,000, Ma. My name's on it. They sent it to me at work. I sat very still on the edge of that bed. $86,000. I'd seen the number on Odell's printout an hour before, cold and flat on a page. But hearing my son say it out loud, hearing the number land in his voice instead of mine, did something different to me. It made it real in a way ink on paper hadn't. Read it to me, I said. All of it. He did, and his voice wavered through the legal language the same way mine probably had 3 weeks earlier reading that folder. Words too big and too repetitive to trust. The kind of language built to make a person stop paying close attention right when they need to be paying the closest attention of their life. Somewhere in the middle he said the word fraudulent instrument, and his voice caught on it like it had teeth. Ma. His voice dropped lower. I signed for that loan thinking it was legitimate. Did you know about this? I could have told him everything right then. Could have told him about the folder, about Winslow's shaking hands, about the 8 days between the refinance and my flight home. Some part of me wanted to hand him the whole truth and watch it land on somebody besides me for once. But another part of me, the part that had spent 2 nights now learning how to think instead of just feel, held back. I didn't know yet what my son already knew and didn't know. I didn't know if I was talking to a man who'd been fooled the same way I had, or a man who already understood more than he was letting on and was calling me to test the water before he decided which way to jump. I didn't sign for any refinance, I said. That much was true, and it was all I gave him. He went quiet. Not the quiet of a man waiting for his mother to explain more. A different quiet. The kind that sits heavy on a phone line, the kind you can almost hear thinking behind it. I've raised that boy 39 years, and I know the difference between his confused silence and his figuring something out silence. And this wasn't confusion. This was calculation. This was a man doing math in his head about his own wife, and not liking where the numbers landed. "Marlon," I said, "who do you think did this?" The silence stretched longer than a simple question should have taken to answer. Long enough that I understood he already had a name sitting on his tongue and wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Not to me, and maybe not even fully to himself. "I gotta go, Ma," he said finally, and the line went dead before I could say another word. I was in the motel parking lot when the man in the gray polo asked if I was Atavia, Fairweather, and something in me went cold before he even finished the sentence. Because men who ask you to confirm your own name in parking lots are never bringing good news. "You've been served," he said, and put a thick envelope in my hand like it weighed nothing to him. I didn't open it standing there in front of him. I waited until I was back in my room, sitting on the edge of that bed that still didn't feel like mine, before I broke the seal. The first page had my name at the top, printed in bold, official letters. Below it, language I had to read twice before I let myself believe what I was seeing. Words like petition for emergency guardianship. Words like concerns regarding the proposed ward's capacity. And there, halfway down the second paragraph, one word that hit me harder than anything Tressie had said on that porch. Incapacitated. Somebody had put that word next to my name. Somebody had written, in a legal document filed with the county, that I might not be capable of managing my own life. 64 years old, 31 years running my own household, 40 years working a postal route in weather that would have broken younger backs. And here was a stranger's signature underneath a claim that I'd lost my mind. My hands weren't quite steady when I dialed DeLacy Prather's office. I'd retained her the same day Odell showed me that refinance, a name a friend from church had given me years back for a will I never got around to writing. I hadn't expected to need her this fast, and certainly not for this. "DeLacy, I need you to explain something to me right now," I said. And I didn't bother softening my voice the way I usually did with people I barely knew. "Somebody has filed papers saying I'm incapacitated." She was quiet, a beat too long on her end, and that quiet told me something before she even spoke. "Otavia, I need you to stay calm while I explain this," she said. "Someone filed a welfare concern about you. Anonymous, according to the report, said you'd seemed confused, isolated, not managing your affairs. That kind of report can move a case fast, especially when there's a family member ready to step in and say they're worried." "A family member," I repeated, and I didn't need her to say the name. I already had it sitting in my chest like a stone. "There's more," DeLacy said, and her voice dropped in a way lawyers' voices only drop when the news is worse than what came before it. "Otavia, there was already a hearing, 2 days ago. The court granted emergency authority over your affairs, both personal and financial." I sat very still, the papers loose in my lap, and let that land. "A hearing," I said slowly. "About me. Without me." "Yes," DeLacy said. Something in my chest that had been cracking since that key wouldn't turn finally broke open the rest of the way, but not into tears this time, into something harder, something with edges. "DeLacy," I said, "tell me exactly what I've lost, and tell me exactly how I get it back." DeLacy's office smelled like coffee and old paper, and she had a folder waiting on her desk before I even sat down, which told me she'd been working on this since we hung up. "Sit," she said, gentler than a lawyer usually sounds. "I want to walk you through exactly what happened in order, so there's no confusion left in your mind." I sat. I'd cried myself out days ago, and what was left in me now wanted facts laid flat on a table. Nothing softened, nothing hidden behind kindness. "Give it to me straight," I said. She opened the folder. A petition was filed claiming you needed emergency protection, both personal and financial. Because it was filed as an emergency, the court can appoint someone before a full hearing ever happens. Not after. Before. That's what emergency means in this context. The judge only hears one side, decides fast, and asks questions later. One side, I repeated. Meaning not mine. Meaning not yours, DeLacy said. You weren't in that courtroom because the law doesn't require you to be. Not at this stage. The idea is to protect somebody from immediate harm while the full picture gets sorted out. In practice, it means whoever files first, and files convincingly, gets the advantage before the person it's about ever gets to open their mouth. Something in my chest that had been burning hot since that envelope landed in my hand went cold instead. Cold and still. The way a kitchen goes quiet right before you start cooking with real intention. So, somebody I've never met, I said slowly, is right now deciding whether I can spend my own money, whether I can sign my own name to anything that matters. Yes, DeLacy said, without flinching from it. Until this is reviewed, a court-appointed authority oversees both. Your finances are frozen except for basic living expenses. Any major decision about your care or your assets goes through them, not you. I sat with that a long moment, feeling the shape of it settle over me like a wet coat. 31 years running a household, 40 years earning every dollar in my own name. And now, some stranger with a court order held more say over my life than I did. How is that legal? I said. And I heard my own voice sharpen into something I hadn't used with her yet. How does a judge sign off on stripping a woman of her own life without ever laying eyes on her? Because the law is built to move fast when somebody claims there's danger, DeLacy said. It's meant for real emergencies, a parent alone and confused, nobody watching over them. It's not supposed to be a weapon. But nothing in the process stops it from being used as one, not at this stage. That's the gap. That's exactly the gap somebody used against you. I looked at her, steady now. The fury in me no longer loud but focused, sharpened down to something with a clear edge. Then we close that gap, I said, whatever it takes. I am not spending the rest of my life asking somebody else's permission to live it. DeLacy nodded slowly, but there was something careful in her face, like she wasn't finished yet. There's a review process, she said. You can challenge this. But Atavia, review takes time, weeks, sometimes longer. And time is exactly what whoever filed this is counting on. There was a knock at my motel room door on a Tuesday morning, brisk and businesslike. Nothing like the soft knuckles of somebody checking if I wanted fresh towels. I opened it to a woman in a gray blazer, a leather folder tucked under one arm, glasses pushed up into hair that hadn't seen a curling iron in a while, and didn't need to. Mrs. Fairweather? Cassietta Odom. I've been appointed by the court to look into your situation. She didn't wait for an invitation before her eyes swept past me into the room, taking in the unmade bed, the stack of papers on the nightstand, the suitcase still half-packed in the corner like I hadn't let myself believe I'd be staying long. May I come in? I let her in because refusing would have looked like something to hide. And I didn't have anything to hide, whatever anybody else wanted to believe. She sat without being asked, opened her folder, and started in with questions that came out soft and unhurried. The kind that make you forget you're being tested until you're already 3 answers deep. What day of the week was it? Who was the president? Did I know today's date? I answered everyone plain and fast, and something in her pen slowed down like she'd expected to be writing longer. Tell me about your relationship with your daughter-in-law, she said next, still in that same easy tone. Complicated, I said, getting more complicated by the day. Complicated how? I told her plainly. The locks, the trucks, the ultimatum on the porch. The folder I'd signed weeks before any of it. I kept my voice even, kept the anger out of it, because I'd already learned once what happens to an old woman who lets her voice climb too high in front of somebody holding a pen. Cassietta wrote without looking up much, her face giving away nothing. And then she set the pen down and looked at me straight, the kind of look that isn't unkind, but isn't warm either. "And is there a reason?" she said, slow and deliberate, each word laid down like a stone. "Your daughter-in-law felt this was urgent? Felt you needed protecting so quickly that it couldn't wait for a hearing with you in the room?" I felt that question land somewhere just under my ribs. It wasn't cruel on its surface. It was polite, professional, exactly the kind of question a careful woman is supposed to ask. But underneath the politeness was a blade, and I understood in that moment that Cassietta Odom wasn't here to be my ally. She wasn't here to be anybody's ally. She was here to decide, and I had no way of knowing yet which way her decision would fall. "No," I said, steady. "There's no reason, unless you count somebody wanting a house they haven't earned." She didn't react to that, not with agreement, not with doubt. She just wrote something down, unhurried, the scratch of her pen, the only sound in that small room for a moment too long. I made myself a promise sitting there, watching her write whatever she was writing. I wasn't going to let this woman see one crack in me, not one raised voice, not one moment of confusion, not one thing she could carry back into a report with my name on it and somebody else's version of events sitting next to it. "Is there anything else you need from me?" I asked. Cassietta closed her folder, stood, and gave me a small, unreadable nod. "Not today," she said, and let herself out without another word, her face still giving away absolutely nothing. My phone rang while I was folding the same 3 shirts I'd been re-wearing for what felt like a lifetime now, and the name on the screen was Miss Luetta, who'd lived 2 doors down from me for going on 20 years. "Otavia, baby. I hope it's all right I'm calling," she said, her voice pitched low like she was standing somewhere she didn't want overheard. "A woman came by here yesterday, official looking, asking questions about you." My hands went still on the shirt I was folding. "What kind of questions?" "Whether you seemed yourself lately, whether you'd been acting strange, confused, anything like that." I told her the truth. That you're the sharpest woman on this block and always have been. But Otavia, she wasn't just asking me. She was over at the Reynolds place too, and I saw her car parked outside the Franklins for near 20 minutes. I sat down slow on the edge of that motel bed, feeling something tighten in my chest that had nothing to do with fear this time and everything to do with control slipping through my fingers. I'd answered every one of Cassietta's questions carefully, precisely, thinking the story being told about me was still mostly in my hands. Hearing that she was out there gathering it from other mouths too, mouths I couldn't guide or correct in the moment, unsettled me in a way I hadn't expected. "What else did she ask?" I said. "Mostly about you. But she did ask me one thing that struck me odd." Luetta paused, and I could hear her deciding whether it was worth saying. "She asked when I first noticed anything different going on at your house. And I told her, well, nothing was different until that same night you got back from your sister's. That's the night I saw those 2 trucks pull up." Something went very still and very sharp inside me. "What night, Luetta? Tell me exactly." "The night you got in from Mobile, baby. I remember because I was putting my trash out late, and I saw the headlights turning into your driveway, right around the time it started raining hard. 2 trucks. I thought maybe you'd hired movers for something. Didn't think twice about it till just now, telling that woman about it." I sat with that a long moment, my mind working fast and cold. Luetta had handed me, without even knowing it, The one detail that pinned everything down to a single, undeniable hour. The trucks arriving the very same night I stood locked out in the rain, not some later, more innocent day. That wasn't a family making a slow, considered decision to move in and help out. That was a plan already loaded and waiting on a trigger, timed to the very hour I'd be too soaked and exhausted to fight back. And Cassietta didn't have that detail yet. Luetta had told her the trucks came that same night, but not the why behind it, not what it proved when you laid it next to everything else. The folder, the refinance filed 8 days early, the notaries shaking hands. Only I could connect that whole line for her. I thanked Luetta, told her she'd helped me more than she knew, and sat there after we hung up with my thumb hovering over Cassietta's number. I wasn't going to wait for that woman to piece this together on her own time, at her own pace, while Tressie kept living in my house like she owned it outright. I pressed call. There was a knock at my motel door late that evening, different from Cassietta's brisk, businesslike rap. This one was hesitant, almost apologetic, and something in me knew who it was before I even reached the handle. Marlon stood there in the hallway, light, looking like a man who hadn't slept right in days. His collar was wrinkled, his eyes rimmed red at the edges, and for a moment neither of us said anything, just stood there, taking each other in like strangers reintroducing themselves. "Ma," he said, "can I come in?" I stepped back and let him. He sat on the edge of the small table chair, not the bed. Like he didn't feel he'd earned the right to get comfortable in whatever space I had left, that was mine. "I met with that woman," he said. "Cassietta, the one from the court. I went to her on my own, Ma. Nobody sent me. My guard, the one I'd been holding rigid for weeks now against everybody who came through that door, dropped an inch before I could stop it. Not all the way. Just enough that something in my chest loosened at the sight of my son sitting there, finally, choosing to show up. "Why now?" I said. And I didn't soften it, didn't dress it up kind. "Weeks, Marlon. Weeks I've been out here, and this is the first time you've come to me instead of calling from somewhere safe." He flinched at that, but he didn't argue it. Last night, Tressie sat across from me at dinner and told me, calm as anything, that once this blows over, we'd need to talk about your care differently going forward. Like you were a line item, Ma, not my mother. Something to manage. That's what did it. Hearing her say it that plain, that cold, and realizing I'd been letting myself not see it for weeks. He looked down at his hands. "I've been scared, not just for you. I need you to hear that part honest. I've been scared for myself too. My name's on that loan. If this all comes out the way it looks like it's about to, I'm not just the husband who didn't know what his wife was doing. I could be looking at real trouble. My job. Everything." I sat down slow across from him, watching him say the ugly, selfish truth out loud instead of dressing it up as something nobler than it was. And strange as it sounds, that honesty did something no comforting lie could have done. I believed him. A son telling his mother a cold dinner table sentence was what finally broke something loose in him, rang truer than any speech about loyalty and love would have. "So Tressie handed you the reason herself," I said, "without meaning to." "Without meaning to," he said. "Both things are true, Ma. I swear it's both now, you and me. But I won't lie and say the fear for myself didn't get me moving faster than the love did." I studied him a long moment, my own son, 39 years old, looking smaller in that chair than I'd seen him look since he was a boy, caught in some lie he couldn't quite hold together. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "Everything about the signing, the folder, how fast that notary moved." He rubbed a hand down his face, something shifting behind his eyes. Ma, there's something else. Something I haven't told anybody yet. Not Cassietta. Not you. I waited, my whole body gone still. He opened his mouth, started to speak, and stopped himself cold, his jaw working like the words were fighting him on the way out. Marlon, I said quietly, what haven't you told anybody? He shook his head, stood up fast, like the chair had gotten too hot to sit in. Not tonight, he said. I need to think first. I'll tell you. Just not tonight. And before I could stop him, he was out the door. DeLacy's assistant called that morning and said she needed me in the office as soon as I could get there. And there was something in how carefully the girl chose her words that told me not to expect small talk when I arrived. DeLacy was standing when I walked in, not sitting behind her desk the way she usually did, and that alone put me on alert before she said a word. We found Winslow Duckworth, she said. I met with him yesterday. And, I said, taking the chair across from her without being asked. He's cooperating, or getting there. It wasn't clean, Otavia. He hedged plenty before any of it came out straight. I felt something rise in me, some old habit of wanting to breathe easy at the first sound of good news, and I caught it before it could take hold. Good news secondhand, softened by somebody else's summary, had already cost me once. I'd trusted a folder full of somebody else's summary, and it had cost me my own front door. I don't want the short version, I said. Tell me exactly what he said. Word for word, DeLacy. Or as close as you can get me. She studied me a moment, then nodded like she respected the demand more than she'd expected to. At first, he claimed it was routine. Said he does off-site notarizations all the time, nothing unusual about it. I pushed on why Tressie called him directly instead of going through his usual office, and he got quiet, started backtracking on details he'd already given me. Eventually, he admitted she'd offered him extra to come out same day, no advance paperwork sent over the way it's supposed to be. He kept saying, I don't remember exactly about half of it, but the parts he did remember, he remembered clear. He said, close to his words, she told me it was a formality, that the family already understood everything and just needed it stamped quick before somebody changed their mind. Whose mind? I said. Mine? That's what I asked him, DeLacy said. He wouldn't answer that one straight, just looked at his hands a long time. But Otavia, when I asked if he'd confirmed you understood what you were signing, or confirmed you weren't under pressure in that room, he didn't hedge on that part at all. Said no. Flat out. Said Tressie made it clear speed mattered more than procedure, and he didn't argue it. I sat with that a long moment, feeling the shape of it settle into place beside everything else I already knew. The folder, the refinance filed 8 days early, the trucks arriving that same rainy night. Each piece on its own could maybe be explained away, called a misunderstanding, called a family being hasty instead of a family being criminal. But this piece was different. A man half-hedging on everything else, then admitting plainly the one thing that mattered most, that he'd guaranteed nothing at all. That's not carelessness, I said slowly. That's a man who knew exactly what he was helping happen, even if he can't quite say it that way yet. That's exactly how a prosecutor would read it too, DeLacy said, her voice sharper, more certain than I'd heard it since I first walked into her office weeks ago. Up until now, everything we had could still be framed as a messy family dispute. What Winslow gave me, even hedged the way it was, doesn't fit that frame anymore. What is it then? I asked, though some cold, steady part of me already knew the shape of her answer before she gave it. DeLacy met my eyes and didn't blink. That's a criminal case, she said, and I think it's time we made sure the right people know it. My phone rang a little past noon while I was sitting in DeLacy's waiting room, And the name on the screen was one I didn't recognize at first, Hosea Tolliver, until I remembered him from the paperwork Odell had printed for me weeks ago, the title investigator whose name kept surfacing in the fine print of every document tied to that refinance. "Mrs. Fairweather, I need a moment of your time," he said. No preamble. Urgency riding under every word. "This is important. Your bank's fraud department called our office first, since your case is already flagged with us. They wanted it on record with the investigation before anything else happened." "I'm listening," I said, and something in his tone had already started tightening a knot low in my stomach. "Someone attempted to move funds out of one of your remaining accounts about an hour ago," he said. "A transfer request, fairly large, routed toward an account that isn't in your name." For a moment, the waiting room chairs, the low hum of the office printer, the woman across from me flipping through a magazine, all of it went distant and thin, like I was hearing my own life through water. Cold fear moved through me first, sharp and fast, the kind that used to send me straight into the kind of panic I'd stood in, that rein refusing to give anybody. But it passed quicker than it used to. Weeks of learning to think instead of just feel had built something steadier underneath the fear, and that steadier thing rose up now and took the wheel. "Did it go through?" I asked. "No, ma'am. Flagged and blocked before it cleared. Your accounts have carried extra monitoring since the guardianship order went into place. Standard practice once there's an active fraud concern already on file with us. Whoever tried this either didn't know that or didn't care." "Who tried it?" I said, though I already had the shape of the answer sitting cold and certain in my chest before he ever gave it to me. Hosea paused. The kind of pause a careful man takes when he knows what he's about to say will land like a stone. "The request came through the authority granted under the guardianship order. Mrs. Fairweather, it was your daughter-in-law." I sat very still, the phone warm against my ear, and let that settle into place beside everything else. Tressie had spent weeks being careful, patient, letting the system's own machinery do her work for her, the folder, the notary, the petition, all of it moving quiet and lawful-looking on the surface. But this wasn't quiet. This wasn't patient. This was a woman reaching for more than she'd been given, treating a limited, temporary authority like it was a blank check with my name attached. "She overreached," I said slowly, half to Hosea, half to myself. "She did," Hosea said. "And Mrs. Fairweather, I'll be honest with you. This isn't the kind of thing that stays quiet. An attempted transfer like this, on an account already flagged in an active fraud matter, doesn't just sit in a file somewhere. It moves. Moves where? Your bank already looped in the detective handling your case, same as they looped in us," he said. "I imagine you'll be hearing from him directly before the day's out." I closed my eyes a moment, feeling something shift inside me that wasn't relief exactly, and wasn't triumph either, but sat somewhere close to both. Tressie had spent weeks building a wall around herself, made of paperwork and patience. And today, reaching for one thing too many, she'd knocked the first real crack straight through the middle of it herself. The detective who called himself Silas Yancey showed up at DeLacy's office a little over 3 weeks after Hosea's call. A broad-shouldered man with a notebook so worn at the edges, it looked like it had outlived several cases already. It had taken that long, DeLacy told me beforehand, for the bank's fraud unit and the detective's office to fully cross-reference the notary's statement against the account records. These things moved in weeks, she'd warned me, not days, however much I wanted it different. "Mrs. Fairweather, I appreciate you making the time," he said, settling into the chair across from me like a man used to sitting across from people whose lives had just been turned inside out. "I've had nothing but time," I said. Tell me where things stand." He opened his notebook, but I noticed he barely looked down at it as he spoke, like the case had already settled itself into his memory the way only a case that mattered to him would. Took us a while to nail this down properly, but we've got 3 pieces that fit together now. The notary's statement, paid to bypass verification. The attempted account transfer, flagged and blocked, tied directly to the guardianship authority. And after pulling phone records these past couple weeks, we've confirmed the welfare report that triggered your guardianship petition in the first place was filed anonymously, from a number we've since traced. Traced to who? I said. Though I already knew, and some part of me needed to hear him say her name out loud instead of leaving it hanging the way everyone else had for weeks. Tressie Sloan Fairweather, Silas said, plain and unflinching. Same phone that placed the anonymous call also shows contact with the notary the week before your signing, and initiated the attempted transfer. Something moved through me, hearing it laid out like that. 3 separate threads finally tied into one knot, with her name sitting at the center of it. Relief came first. A loosening in my chest I hadn't let myself feel since that key failed to turn. But right behind it came something colder, harder, something closer to vindication than relief. "What happens to her now?" I asked plainly, no softening it. "We're requesting a formal interview," Silas said. "Given what we've got, I expect it'll take another week or 2 to schedule properly. These things don't move as fast as television makes them look. If what she says doesn't align with the evidence, and based on what I'm seeing, I don't expect it will, we'll be moving toward charges. Fraud. Possibly forgery, depending on what else surfaces about that trust document. Filing a false report is its own charge, on top of that." I sat with that, letting it settle instead of rushing past it the way I might have weeks ago. "I don't want to be protected from any of this," I said. "Not anymore. Whatever happens next, however ugly it gets, I want to be told. All of it. Straight." Silas studied me a moment, something like respect crossing his face. "Understood," he said, and the word landed strange in my ears. The same word I'd handed Tressie on that porch weeks ago, now coming back to me from a different mouth entirely. "There's one more thing," he said, closing his notebook. "By the time the interview's actually scheduled, it's going to land the same week as your guardianship review. Court calendars being what they are, both matters are converging." I felt my pulse pick up at that, some old fear and new resolve tangling together at once. "Same week," I repeated. "Same week," Silas said. "I'd get ready." Marlon came to the motel that evening looking like a man who hadn't slept in days, hollow around the eyes, his shirt wrinkled in a way that told me he'd worn it more than once without noticing. "I gave my statement," he said, before I'd even gotten the door fully open. "Formal, to Silas Yancey. Everything, the folder, the notary, what I saw and didn't ask about." I stood there a moment, my hand still on the door, and something in me went quiet instead of loud. Quiet in a way I hadn't expected from myself after weeks of waiting on exactly this. I thought vindication would feel like triumph. Standing there looking at my son's exhausted face, it felt heavier than that, more solemn, like watching something necessary finally happen instead of something worth celebrating. "Come sit," I said. And he did, dropping into the chair like his legs had finally stopped agreeing to hold him up out of politeness. "Can you forgive me?" he said. Not as a question exactly, more like something he needed to say out loud regardless of what answer came back. "For how long it took me. You were out here alone for weeks, Ma, and I knew things weren't right. And I still let fear keep my mouth shut longer than it should have." I didn't answer that right away. I let him sit in it a moment, because some things shouldn't be rushed past with easy comfort. "There's more," he said before I could speak. "The thing I couldn't tell you before. I need to say it now." I nodded, steady, waiting. About a month before you went to Mobile, he said, his voice dropping lower. I came home early one day and found Tressie on the phone with somebody, talking quiet, talking careful. I only caught the end of it. She was saying something about protecting what's ours before anything happens to her. I asked who she was talking to. She said it was nothing, just planning ahead for the future. And Ma, I let it go. I didn't ask more. Some part of me didn't want to know what she meant by before anything happens. I felt something cold move through me hearing that, not shock exactly, more the settling weight of a suspicion finally given its proper shape. You knew something was already moving, I said slowly, before that folder ever touched my kitchen table. Not new, he said, suspected. And I buried it, because looking at it straight meant admitting who I'd married wasn't who I thought she was. That's on me, Ma, all of it. The not asking is its own kind of guilt. I looked at my son a long moment, 39 years old, finally saying the ugly, cowardly truth out loud, instead of burying it deeper the way he'd buried it for a month before any of this started. I could have let the anger in me reach for it, could have told him a month's silence had cost me more than he'd ever fully understand. But grace, real grace, isn't the absence of anger. It's choosing what to do with it. I forgive the not knowing, I said. The not asking, we'll have to keep working on. But you're here now, telling me straight. That counts for something, Marlon. It counts for a lot. His shoulders dropped like something had finally let go of him. She knows, he said quietly. Tressie. She knows I talked to Silas. She called me twice tonight and I didn't answer. Before I could respond, a knock landed on the motel door, sharp and unmistakable. 3 quick raps. I looked at Marlon. He looked back at me, and neither of us moved. I crossed the room and opened it, and there she stood in the hallway light, alone, for the first time since the night she'd locked me out in the rain. Tressie, I said. Tressie hadn't stayed long that night at my door. A few tense, quiet words about wanting to talk before things went further. And then she'd left, when I told her whatever she needed to say belonged in front of a judge, not in a motel hallway. I didn't tell her anything that night. I'd learned by then that my words carried more weight when I chose exactly where to spend them. The courtroom on hearing day was smaller than I'd pictured, wood-paneled and quiet, the kind of room that didn't look big enough to hold everything that was about to happen inside it. DeLacy had explained on the drive over that the judge was hearing both matters together that morning, my guardianship review and the civil fraud claim tied to the deed, since the evidence in one bore so directly on the other. I walked in on my own 2 feet this time, DeLacy beside me, and took my seat at the front instead of learning about my own fate secondhand from somebody else's phone call. Cassietta Odom testified first. She stood straight, spoke plainly, no hesitation in her voice the way there'd been none in her face that day in my motel room. In my assessment, she said, Mrs. Fairweather demonstrated full clarity, full memory, and full capacity to manage her own affairs. That assessment was supported by an independent medical evaluation ordered as part of this review, which confirmed no cognitive impairment of any kind. I found no evidence supporting the claims made in the original petition. What I did find over the course of my investigation was a documented pattern, a forged consent, a fraudulent refinance, and a welfare report that does not match the facts on record. I watched the room shift as she spoke. Not loud, nothing dramatic. Just a slow, cold tightening in the row where Tressie sat between her mother and father. Nadine's hand, which had been resting on her daughter's arm when the hearing opened, slid away sometime during Cassietta's testimony and didn't come back. Huell stared straight ahead at nothing, his jaw set tight, a man already rehearsing his distance. When DeLacy stood to present the notary's statement and the flag transfer, I watched Tressy's composure begin to come apart in real time. Not all at once, but in pieces. The practiced calm slipping first from her shoulders, then from her hands, which she pressed flat against her thighs like she was trying to hold something in that had already gotten loose. The judge didn't take long once everything was laid out plain in front of him. On the guardianship matter, he dismissed it outright, calling the original petition unsupported by any credible evidence. On the deed itself, he ruled the transfer void as obtained through fraud, restoring the property fully to my name, and ordered the Sloan family's occupancy terminated, with the sheriff's office authorized to enforce their removal within 72 hours if they hadn't vacated on their own. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry either, though I felt something enormous shift loose inside my chest, something that had been sitting there heavy since the night that key wouldn't turn. I just sat still and let it settle, the way you let a held breath finally leave your body slow instead of all at once. Across the room, Tressy sat frozen, her mother no longer touching her, her father not looking at her at all, her brother staring down at his own hands like he wished he were anywhere else. She looked smaller in that chair than I'd ever seen her look on my porch. The ruling landed, final and unmistakable. And in that moment, I watched something happen to Tressy's face that I recognized immediately. Because I'd felt it happen to my own face once, weeks ago, standing soaked and stunned under a carport in the rain. All the color went out of it at once. The key turned. Simple as that. After everything. 3 weeks of motel ceilings and courtroom benches and phone calls that changed the shape of my whole life. The key turned in my own lock like it had never done anything else in its life. I stood on my porch a moment before I stepped inside, feeling the ordinary click of a key in a door do something extraordinary to my chest. Inside, the house was mine again. But not the same as I'd left it. The Sloan family had been gone 3 days by then, and whatever they'd taken with them, whatever they'd left behind out of haste or spite, I hadn't looked at yet. I walked through it room by room like I was meeting the place for the first time. The kitchen table where I'd signed that folder, the hallway where Cortez's photograph still hung crooked from somebody brushing past it carelessly, my reading chair back in its place by the window, a little worse for wear but home all the same. I stood in the doorway of my own bedroom a long moment and let myself feel both things at once, because I'd learned by then that grief and relief don't take turns. They sit in a body together, tangled, and you don't get to have one without carrying the other. Relief that the fight was over. Grief for the woman who'd stood soaked and shaking under that carport, who hadn't known yet what she'd have to become to get her life back. Marlon came by that afternoon, knocking soft this time. None of the urgency of that last visit to the motel. "I want to help you move back in properly," he said, standing on my porch the way he used to as a boy waiting to be let inside after track practice. "Whatever you need. Furniture, boxes, whatever they left out of place. I want to do this part right." I let him in, and we spent that afternoon quiet and steady. Writing what needed writing, not talking much, which was its own kind of conversation between us. DeLacy called near evening with an update I'd been waiting on without letting myself hope too hard for it. The prosecutor's office had moved forward. Fraud, forgery, filing a false report, all 3 charges now formally on record against Tressy. I didn't feel triumph hearing it. Not the sharp kind anyway. Just a quiet settling. The sense of a scale finally balancing after weeks of sitting tilted against me. That evening, sitting in my own reading chair for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I thought hard about what came next between my son and me. Forgiveness wasn't going to look like pretending none of it happened. It was going to look like slow trust, rebuilt one honest afternoon at a time, the way we'd spent this one. Not talking around what happened, but choosing, deliberately, to show up for the small, ordinary work of repair. "I'm glad you're home, Ma," Marlon said from the doorway, ready to head out for the night. "I'm glad you helped me get here," I said, and meant every word of it. The forgiveness and the boundary both folded into the same sentence. He left, and I sat alone in my own house, in my own chair, in the particular quiet of a place that finally, fully, belonged to me again. I'd learned something out there in the rain that I hadn't known before. A locked door doesn't mean you're finished. Sometimes it just means you haven't found your key yet.